Finally, Dad's passed away. What a relief. He was a stubborn old man with money, but he was nothing but a nuisance. On the day of the funeral, Alex's expression was more of a smirk than sadness. How can you say that? He scoffed. You had debts that Dad took care of. Shut up. He wouldn't die and kept racking up hospital bills. Now I can finally use his money as I see fit. How dare you? You've been living off Dad all this time. Say what you want. You're on your own now. You're useless. Just leave. Brother-in-law, how could you? William chimed in, scolding Alex. Meanwhile, their sister-in-law, who was also present, laughed dismissively and said, marriage doesn't make you family. I'm sure even your father-in-law wouldn't want outsiders here. You should leave right away. Her words shattered something inside me. To insult my father and deny our bond, these people are truly vile. There was no point in arguing further. The last thing I wanted was to disrupt my father's funeral. I fought to keep my anger in check and resigned myself to the situation. I could barely manage to say a few words before I chose to bid my final farewell to my father and leave. I promised myself never to associate with these people again. My name is Lily. I work as a nurse at a children's hospital. I married William, a radiologic technologist I met through work a few years ago. Our on-call schedules make it difficult to find time for just the two of us, but we treasure the moments we do have together. William's role is crucial. Imaging plays a vital part in diagnosing and treating patients. He handles numerous imaging tasks daily, always on the lookout for even the smallest abnormalities, which adds significant pressure to his job. Despite the demands of his work, I deeply respect William for his dedication. He often tells me how much he admires my commitment to communicating with patients and their families, even with my hectic schedule. Once upon a time, I could hardly imagine that I would become a source of help for others or that such joyful days would ever be in my future. My father worked for a major trading company and was often stationed abroad, leaving my mother, Alex, and me to manage on our own. In that environment, my mother and Alex treated me more like a servant than a family member. Didn't I tell you to clean this up? You're so useless. Hey Lily, get me some juice. You've got a minute. This harsh treatment and constant demands were a regular part of my life. My mother, who was devoted to Alex, made me feel like nothing more than a bother. Seeing her behavior, Alex grew up to adopt the same domineering attitude towards me. As a child, I did everything I could to meet their expectations, but despite my efforts, both my mother and Alex continued to belittle me, even when my father returned from his overseas assignments. By the time I was in high school, their attitudes hadn't changed. Although my father tried to defend me, my mother and Alex blamed him for everything. I raised these two all on my own while you were away, my mother would say. You didn't lift a finger to help, and now you're back and trying to play the role of dad? We've managed just fine without you. Don't come in here acting all high and mighty. Despite my father's attempts to argue with them, no resolution was reached. Eventually, their anger shifted from him to me. Watching this, my father felt powerless to confront my mother and Alex, fearing it would only make things worse for me. Despite his presence, he was filled with regret for not being able to change their attitudes and tearfully apologized to me. I'm sorry, but just having my father there saved me from being treated like I was useless and a nuisance by my mother and Alex. I felt as though I were lost in a dark tunnel, unsure of my own worth. Then my father told me, Lily, you're not useless. You're not a nuisance. You're part of our family, and you're a good person who belongs here. Those words were enough to keep my spirits up, even when my mother and Alex continued to belittle and order me around. Knowing that my father was there to support me kept my heart from darkening. When it came time for me to graduate high school, my mother insisted that I start working immediately, forbidding me from attending college. Meanwhile, Alex, who barely studied, was allowed to go to a private university and waste his time. Despite this, my father refused to stay silent. He asked me what I wanted for my future and assured me that I could make my own choices. His support gave me hope and a sense of direction for my own path. After years of being at the beck and call of my mother and Alex, I had never really considered my own future. But now, I began to seriously think about what I wanted to do with my life. I knew I wanted a career where I could genuinely help people, so I decided to become a nurse. When I shared my aspiration, my father quietly took action behind the scenes. He arranged for me to attend nursing school, covering the entrance fees and finding me a place to stay, all without my mother or Alex finding out. Thanks to his efforts, I was able to enroll in nursing school without any obstacles. Since then, I only returned home when my mother passed away. Throughout nursing school and beyond, I stayed in touch with my father. When I landed my first job, passed my national exams, started dating William, and eventually decided to get married, my father was overjoyed. He celebrated these milestones as if they were his own achievements. Meanwhile, I worry about him being alone at home, but he always reassured me, saying, "I'm fine," and dismissed any concerns I raised. My father, who had always been stoic and never showed signs of weakness, mentioned during a phone call that he was feeling some discomfort in his midsection. Although he downplayed it as just a minor pain, I had a feeling he was underestimating the issue. I suggested he visit the hospital for a checkup. A few days later, he called to say that his endoscopy had shown no issues. I felt a sense of relief, but my husband, William, was not entirely convinced. He pointed out that an endoscopy might not detect all problems and recommended a cancer screening as a precaution. I passed on William's suggestion to my father and urged him to follow through. The results of the cancer screening were a devastating blow. My father had pancreatic cancer. Although the diagnosis was shocking, we were relieved to learn that the cancer was still at a stage where it could potentially be removed through surgery. My father was soon admitted for the operation. The news initially cast me into a dark place, but fortunately, the surgery was successful. When William and I visited him in the hospital, despite his evident fatigue, he greeted us with a warm smile. Just as I began to feel a bit of relief seeing my father looking better than expected, the door to his room flew open. Alex and a woman entered abruptly. Alex gave us a brief, dismissive glance before striding into the room with little regard for our presence. "Get out," he said, gesturing toward the door as if we were obstructing him. The woman with him, whom I quickly recognized as Grace, Alex's new wife, was also signaling for us to leave. From what my father had told me about Alex's marriage, I knew this had to be his wife. "Can't you wait a moment? We just got here," I protested, but Alex merely smirked at me, his expression dripping with disdain. "As if talking to Dad will make any difference." "I understand, but I've hardly had a chance to speak with him," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. "Brother-in-law, please give us a bit more time," my husband pleaded with Alex. But Alex shot back bluntly. "So you're the one who married Lily, huh? I don't care if you're a radiology tech or whatever. Without doctors, nurses, and techs, none of you matter. So don't get all high and mighty." He smirked with a self-satisfied sneer. And before we could even rise from our seats, he turned to our father and began speaking with startling disregard. "Dad, I've gotten myself into debt again. I need your help." "What?" I gasped in shock at Alex's words. Instead of showing any concern for our father's condition, he was suddenly talking about money and suggesting that our father had previously covered his debts. "Alex, you need to take responsibility for your own debts. Do you even grasp what Dad is going through right now?" "Shut up. I'm making Dad pay for his past mistakes. He neglected us when we were kids. He can't just buy forgiveness with money." "What?" I was stunned by Alex's despicable behavior. His words left me speechless, and I knew I had to intervene. I was the only one who could stop him. As I struggled to find the right words to respond, my sister-in-law, standing next to Alex, shot me a puzzled look. "Don't act so superior just because you're married. You're in the way, so just go home." I couldn't hold back any longer and snapped at my sister-in-law's words. "That's enough," I shouted, forgetting that we were in a hospital room. "Lily, stop," William quickly intervened, and I was momentarily taken aback. My father then quietly said, "Lily, you should go home for today," offering us a weak smile. "Thank you for coming. You can visit again another day." At my father's words, Alex and his wife looked smug and victorious. I felt a gnawing unease about leaving my father alone with them. Despite feeling guilty for my outbursts in the hospital room, I knew I couldn't continue the argument and reluctantly left. Over the next few days, I anxiously worried about my father and the tension between him and Alex. Then one day, my father developed complications. The shock of his deteriorating condition was immense. His physical and mental strength waned as he struggled to eat properly, and despite the attending physician's best efforts, he passed away a few weeks later. The grief was overwhelming, but I had no time to dwell on it. Alex and his wife were entirely unhelpful, so William and I had to handle all the funeral arrangements ourselves. On the day of the funeral, as I greeted the attendees and waited for the service to begin, Alex displayed an appalling lack of respect for the occasion. He grinned broadly and said, "I'm so relieved Dad is finally gone. He was so stubborn and only cared about money. What a nuisance." "What?" I was stunned. "Dad took on your debts and you're still speaking ill of him." "Shut up," Alex snapped. "His medical bills were overwhelming, and now I can finally access his money as I see fit." "How can you be so callous?" I demanded. "After everything Dad did for you, you still criticize him. Say what you want, but no one's on your side anymore. Just get lost." I couldn't believe my own brother-in-law's behavior. Even as William stood up for me, our sister-in-law smirked and waved us away. "Being married into the family doesn't make you a real part of it. I'm sure even your father-in-law wouldn't want outsiders hanging around. Just go home." Her words were a breaking point for me. To disrespect my father and dismiss my connection to this family was beyond contempt. I knew arguing would only mar Dad's funeral, so I swallowed my rage. "Fine," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. I forced myself to leave, unable to give my final farewell to Dad. I vowed never to deal with these people again. However, the next day, my phone was bombarded with calls from Alex and his wife. I had a strong suspicion about what they wanted, but I chose to ignore them. I figured if I kept avoiding them, they would eventually give up. But Alex proved me wrong. He hired a detective to track me down and showed up at my apartment. "Why aren't you answering your phone?" he demanded as soon as he saw me. "We've been trying to reach you for ages. Come out here. Do you have any idea how much trouble we went through to find you?" As soon as they saw me, they began venting their frustration, bombarding me with their grievances before I could even respond. "Is that lawyer telling the truth? That all of Dad's inheritance goes to you? That can't be right, can it? We're siblings, so the inheritance should be divided equally. Besides, you're the younger one, so you should get less." When I didn't respond, Alex's anger flared. "Say something." It was ironic that they were the ones cutting me off when they hadn't given me a chance to speak. What the lawyer said is true. I was just as shocked when I found out. "No way. So you're saying you get all of that $10 million? I'm not going to accept that." "Whether you accept it or not doesn't change anything, Alex. The decision has already been made. You think you can talk back to me? You've always been useless and you couldn't even help Dad when he needed you. You should just do as I say from now on." Alex was determined to get his hands on the inheritance, refusing to face the reality of the situation. But his efforts were in vain. Our father had explicitly excluded Alex from the list of heirs, and no amount of resistance would change that. "No way. That's a lie, Alex. You made Dad cover your gambling debts under the guise of atonement. On top of that, you used Dad's stockholder benefits without permission and sold his belongings." Dad had taken steps to ensure Alex couldn't inherit his property, citing various incidents involving Alex and my sister-in-law as reasons. "What you've done is more than enough to forfeit any claim to the inheritance. Take what's yours and leave. Don't ever come near me again." As Alex and his wife listened, their angry shouts subsided and their faces turned ashen with realization. Leaving them to grapple with their new reality, I started to head back to my room. My sister-in-law's voice, strained and desperate, cut through the silence. "Wait, please, share the inheritance with us." Even now, my sister-in-law was pleading for a share of the inheritance. When I gave her a cold look, she started to babble frantically. "We didn't even need to be asked. We assumed we'd get Dad's inheritance, so we bought a condominium in the Highlands. We borrowed money from a risky lender, thinking we could pay it back quickly. If we don't settle it soon, the interest will be unbearable. Please share some of the inheritance with us." It turned out that Alex and his wife had not only purchased the condominium but had also indulged in a lavish lifestyle after Dad's passing, gambling more than usual and splurging on designer clothes. "That's not my problem," I replied flatly. Alex, clearly in panic, shouted, "You've always followed my orders before. You should just do as I say now." "When did this happen?" I snapped back at Alex. "I've built a life where I'm respected and contribute to society. I'm not the person I was back then. Don't think you can manipulate me forever." As my voice rose to match his, Alex collapsed to his knees and clung to me, sobbing. "Alex is asking for family support. You should help him," my sister-in-law chimed in, raising her voice as well. I retorted sharply, "You called me a stranger, insulted Dad, and dismissed our relationship. I have no obligation to help you anymore." "What? How dare you?" she fumed. "If you don't leave, I'll call the police. Are you okay with that?" At the mention of the word police, Alex and his wife bolted as if in panic. At the memorial service that followed, I encountered relatives who were still fuming over Alex's behavior. They recounted how Alex and his wife had botched Dad's funeral with their disorganized speeches and lack of decorum, leaving everyone in shock. After a lawyer informed Alex he had no claim to the inheritance, he had tried to track me down through our relatives. When they refused to reveal my whereabouts, he resorted to hiring a detective. When that failed, Alex ended up begging relatives for money, but they turned him down flatly. With no other options, Alex and his wife had to flee with nothing but the clothes on their backs to escape their creditors. Months later, it seems they're still caught in a cycle of evasion, perpetually on the run from their debtors. I can only imagine how weary his wife must be of this life, but she likely can't leave him and they must be constantly at odds. Meanwhile, William and I, unable to attend my father's funeral, make a point of visiting his grave once a month. Thanks to my father's support, I've become a nurse and found the love of my life through my career. I intend to honor his memory every day by giving my best in all that I do.